In our fast-changing and competitive world, there is one constant: your personal brand. What are your unique skills and talents that help set you apart? How will you tell that story? In this podcast, we will talk to some of the leading experts on personal branding to help you become your most iconic you. So, Allison Kluger, I'm so excited to talk to you today on the Iconic You podcast. Thank you so much for making yourself available. First, I'll just start off by introducing you and telling everybody a little bit about your illustrious background. So you have done everything when it comes to media. You've been on camera, you've been behind the scenes. Notably, you were a producer on Good Morning America and also on The View, working with the legendary Barbara Walters. On camera, you were also a host on Q2, which is a QVC spinoff. And so you've done both sides of things and also worked with former Vice President Al Gore on Current TV, his venture. And currently you're at Stanford University, where you teach courses on media and personal branding. And you've managed to kind of bring it all together and tie in your media career and your academic career by teaching courses with celebrities, such as your course with Tyra Banks on personal branding and your course with A-Rod on pivoting your career. So really interesting career and a wealth of experience. So I'm very excited that you're going to bring that to the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. That was an amazing synthesis.
It's quite the resume, so it's exciting to talk to you. So first, just to get us started, I was doing my research and I found a clip that you have posted on YouTube. It was the final presentation for your students for your class with Tyra Banks, and everybody had to do a 90-second self-introduction. So I was just going to watch a little bit. It's like a 60-minute or 90-minute video on YouTube, but I found myself just watching and watching and watching. It was so riveting. Each one was like a miniature story. So my first question for you, Allison, is do you have your own 90-second elevator pitch that kind of tells people about your story?
I probably don't consciously have it, but I could do it for you right now. And just for tips for someone who wants to do it, it really should be kind of who you are, your origin story, and what you've done and what you want to do and how that might benefit the world. So the thought behind it is that maybe you bump into someone in an elevator or you are introduced to someone at a party and you have to capture their attention in a very short period of time. So no rambling stories, no too many details, but can they get the heart of you and the crux of you so that they can take that story to someone else? So let me do it. Let's see if I can do it. I'm a native New Yorker and I was a born storyteller. I read voraciously growing up and I eavesdropped on people and I watched movies. And my talent even then was synthesizing plots and being able to retell stories to other people. I majored in communications. I worked in television right from the start and created innovative content. And my superpower is really that I can take complex ideas and message them very efficiently and effectively, no matter what the platform is. What people always said to me was, Allison, oh, you said that so well. Can you repeat that for me? Or could you get on the phone and talk to someone for me? Or can you write that down? And then at a certain point in my life, I pivoted to higher education at Stanford's business school. And I took those same skills of coaching people, of presenting on different platforms, of creating innovative content. And now I teach all these courses that really draw from that experience.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love how you tied together all these elements of your career into kind of one overarching narrative, which is storytelling. You managed to tie it all together, and that is the through line, even going back to your childhood reading books all the way up to the present. It's that storytelling through line. So that's great. What a good example to show people how to tell your story in a way that's very captivating. So in the spirit of your class, I'm going to take a stab at doing mine as well.
Good. I'm really excited to hear your story.
So mine also starts in childhood. In second grade, we had an assignment to do draw what you want to be when you grow up. So people in the class drew, firefighters, policemen. These were all very popular. And in second grade, I drew a Renaissance man. I don't even know how a kid would draw a Renaissance man. I would love to find this image and see what I drew. So Fast forward to today, I would probably say the same thing. And so I've researched Renaissance people and what that means. So looking at the most famous Renaissance person, Leonardo da Vinci, he combined art and science. So for myself, science is social science. I'm just fascinated by how people interact in society. So I went and got a master's in econ at Georgetown. And then art, I'm very creative. I do interior design, write music, and of course, content creation. So to me, personal branding kind of ties together the art and the science. You need a little bit of both. So that is why I'm doing this podcast. Really, it's been a journey to tell my own story. It's also pretty non-linear, non-traditional. And this podcast is me helping others to tell their story through personal branding.
Wow. I give you an A plus.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. And what it really does is we get a sense of who you are and why you care about what you do. Because if you don't let people know why you care about something, we're not going to care about it. Otherwise, you're just an interchangeable talking head that spews facts. So the more that you fold in your own personal experience, a story, even a failure or a triumph, the more people connect to you. And I really believe that no matter what you do in life, if you can create a positive narrative. A lot of us think, oh, don't look at some of my steps in my life because they don't make any sense. It makes me look, not focused. And I completely disagree. I think that every step in your life is a little nugget that you can pull from and figure out what the commonality is, but what's the new skill you learned? Who's the new person you met? Where was the new opportunity? And if we all reverse engineer and you look at your past, it should look like that.
Right.
It should not look like that.
And that's just how life is. And there's no shame in that. But what you've taught, I've watched, lots of your different videos, is to really own that. Even the things that are the most embarrassing and that your instinct would be, let's hide those. Let's kind of just gloss over those. If you really own those things, even the flaws, that's actually even more powerful in a certain way.
I fully agree with you. I don't think anyone really wants to see perfection. And in this day of social media where we know people just post the good for the most part, makes other people feel less than, or that they feel more competitive, or they have FOMO. And so I believe that we are in a new age where transparency and vulnerability are actually rewarded.
Yeah, I do agree with that. So we can probably come back to that topic. But the next thing I want to ask you is getting into this topic of personal branding. So first of all, what is it? Do you have a certain definition that you like?
I do. And I wrote it down so that I can make sure I get it right. I could speak off my head. I would say that your personal brand is really what you stand for and how you serve the audience around you, and being consistent with your offering. But what I wrote down was your personal brand these days is really a combination of expertise, your personal story, your passion, and how you show up. So that really it's not just about your skills and your resume anymore. People will invest in you as a person, not just as a business savvy person. Like it's not really about your skills. It used to be that in the days of yore, a CEO would hide in the office and no one really knew who the CEO was. Now, the head of a company or the head of a brand, their values, their mission statement is very much a part of how they present to the world. Richard Branson's such a great example. He was one of the first people who really mixed his personality and his brand. Martha Stewart as well. But what's great is that people want to see you kind of in a three-dimensional way.
Right.
And so all those things factor into your personal brand.
Yeah, in a sense, everybody's an influencer these days. Whether you're the CEO, even if you're just, middle management, as they say, everybody has a personal brand and everybody needs to have those influencer skills. And I like how you describe it as three-dimensional. So you're not just, went to this business school, did 10 years at this company. You bring in your personal story, like when we were talking about our stories, talking about some things from childhood, what makes you tick. It's this three-dimensional approach to telling your story. And so I like how you put it in that way.
Thank you.
So next question for you is, we kind of addressed this, but why is that important? Why should people be thinking about their personal brand? I know this came up in your class where some people thought, I'm just an operator. I'm just doing my thing. I'm just a marketer. Like, why for me?
I think it has to do with consistency and also probably making yourself discoverable. So I've learned a lot in personal branding, not only just from Tyra, but from all the research I've done. And what I feel is there's so many of us out there, and so many of us are doing the same thing. So how do you differentiate yourself from someone else? And for the things that made us different, maybe we used to be embarrassed or ashamed of it. But now that to me can be a decisive factor in getting you the job or making an intro. So let me give you an example. You mentioned earlier in my career, I produced Good Morning America, and I helped produce The View. And in between, I did home shopping. Now, this was a secret I kept for many years because, forgive me for anybody out there who does home shopping, but I felt it was very cheesy. And I was leaving the #1 network, ABC. I'd been Emmy nominated, #1 morning show. But I went to home shopping because they doubled my salary and I had reached a ceiling. And I ended up going on air. I ended up selling products 4 hours at a time. I learned how to talk in a persuasive manner. I learned how to demonstrate things. And then I went into the control room and I managed shows that way. And what I realized as I moved on in my career is that this was a real positive point and a credible point for me of why I'm a great communicator. Because I can stand and I can talk and I can think off the top of my head and I can research and I can translate it into ways that people understand. Shows a lot of emotional intelligence to get someone to pick up a phone and buy an object.
And what an amazing, sorry to interrupt. What an amazing training in sales, on the job training in sales every day. The results are right there on the screen. So that's a great training. Mm-hmm.
It is. And it's a little frightening in its own way. And I wasn't above making up stories. People who don't exist, but using that in, we have a saying in strategic communication, which is don't let a good lie get in the way of the truth. No, don't let the truth get in the way of a good lie. And what that means is that it doesn't matter what name you use, or if you create a scenario, it's what's the point behind it? What's the lesson learned? And so now, when I talk about my career, to me, that's a feather in my cap. That is an unusual episode in my life where I learned all these new skills. And it really led me back to ABC to produce The View in the control room in a much higher place. Mm-hmm. So these things that make me different from a normal producer, all the different places that I worked, doing a .com startup, working with Al Gore to start up a network, doing interactive TV. Maybe they weren't always the most logical, but they all were peripherally adjacent. Mm-hmm. But each one of them has a validity to it, and it makes my brand very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it all really ties together. And like you said, that's what makes you unique. You have this interesting cocktail mixture of different experiences that nobody else has. Other people maybe have done the production, but you've done the production plus the on-camera. And that's really distinctive. So, take all these elements from your story, from your experience, and see how they fit together. I think you touched on a good point that a lot of people might have a tendency to kind of smooth out the rough edges or discard that time they got laid off or the time that they went and did their own thing and then they failed. Bring that all into the mix. It's great. That's what makes you interesting.
You couldn't have said it better. And even when you look at LinkedIn profiles, which is our modern day resume, and people always say to me, what kind of online presence should you have? And I said, really, the bare basics is LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I feel like you're either in witness protection or you might be a serial killer. Don't quote me. I do know some people in the military who have been my students who also don't have LinkedIn for those kind of reasons. But aside from that, this is how you make yourself discoverable. But LinkedIn really offers you these ways to shine and differentiate yourself and your personal brand. They have that about section where you don't have to, you can say anything you want about yourself. You could start with the story that you started about being a Renaissance man. Mm-hmm. You could even call yourself your title under your name, Renaissance Man, podcast, or whatever, musician.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Right? And then you support it all. But they've also now allowed gaps in your career. Like maybe you were ill. Maybe you took care of someone during COVID. Maybe you traveled for a year. All these
or raised kids, all these different things.
Or raised kids, mm-hmm. which is the hardest job in the world.
Yes, exactly.
So there's more of an understanding now that people have these, I wouldn't even call it speed bumps, but just different detours. And there's, as long as you explain the why behind something, then people are willing to listen.
Right. Yeah, I found you're very good at doing that, taking the kind of negative and giving it a good positive spin. Not spin sounds like a kind of negative thing, but just owning your story and just telling it in a way that actually builds credibility and power. We hope you're enjoying this episode. To keep up to date on Iconic You episodes, please subscribe to the show and feel free to leave us any ratings or comments and suggestions for future episodes. Now back to our show. So the next topic is getting into this class that you used to teach with Tyra. Can you just share with us, like at a high level, what would be some tips that people could do today to start working on their own personal brand?
Absolutely. Well, the first tip I already shared with you, which is different is better than better. And so the first thing I say to you is, what do you think you bring to the table? Right? What are your skills and what are you known for? And if you don't know, ask the people closest to you. Like, what would you come up to me and say, Allison, you're really good at this? Or Allison, I need you to do this. And same thing with you, James. It's like, what do people come up and say, you're so good at, and they rely on you for that. That's already a marker. The other thing is it's okay to be underestimated. A lot of times we feel uncertain of what we bring to the table, and we go into new areas and we feel if we don't know every detail that we're going to look stupid. But what I always say is it's really great to go and it's okay to be underestimated, because then you can go surprise people. And Tyra said she was constantly underestimated by being an African-American supermodel. And then she'd get into a meeting and people were like, oh my God, she's a businesswoman. The other thing is it's figuring out who you are and being consistent across platforms, what you stand for and what you don't stand for. So again, using Tyra as an example, she would never do anything that had to do with alcohol or tobacco or drugs. And she's very clear on that. And so she knows what she stands for and what she doesn't. For anybody out there who are trying to figure out what their personal brand is, my first thing is make a list of all the things you've done in your life, starting from an early age, starting from when you drew that picture of being a Renaissance man. But maybe you were a student athlete. Maybe you were a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout. Maybe you interned somewhere. Maybe you volunteered somewhere. Maybe you were an activist. And then all the jobs and internships and positions you have, and just list them. And when you finish doing that, then with each one of these, write down the skills that were required or that you learned or that you excelled at in each one of these. And you go down the line. And this is from Karen Kang's book called Branding Pays. And she calls this exercise cake and icing. Your cake is your expertise. It's what people can count on. If you're a lawyer, you can read contracts. If you're a doctor, you probably could do surgery. If you're an engineer, you probably could code. So those things would show up. And then what you do is you circle all the things that keep popping up over and over again. So when I do this exercise in my class, what always pops up is coaching, presenting across platforms, being innovative, messaging effectively, being multifaceted. And then there's the icing part of the cake and icing. How do people describe you? What are 5 words? Are you friendly? Are you collaborative? Are you early? Are you late? Right? Are you a problem solver? Are you rigid? And you just can ask people again. Those words of your icing and your cake create your personal brand. It's a starting point for you. So if you were trying to introduce yourself to someone, you pull those words, you pull those skills, and you create a narrative. To take it to the next level, with each one of those, you find a story that illustrates those skills. When you were a Boy Scout, you were the one who was always the troop leader. Why is that? Because you had the compass, because you knew how to make a fire, because people listened to you. Those early skills as a leader will absolutely keep showing up in the later jobs you had.
Yeah. So this exercise is particularly relevant for people who've had nonlinear careers or lots of pivots, because then you do start to see those commonalities. Like in your case, you did identify that coaching and communication, these were the through lines throughout your career. So this cake and icing exercise would be a great thing for people to do. They can find that book that you mentioned and work through the exercise. And I always find that the part that's hard is actually the icing, to think about how others think of you. It could be different than how you think of yourself. I mean, ideally, we would all have amazing self-awareness, but there's always something that your friends, your family see in yourself that maybe you don't see. So I think that's an interesting piece of it, is trying to understand how the world sees you back. So any tips on that?
Well, completely. I mean, that's the crux of my reputation management class. But before we talk about that, a suggestion for you, if you can't figure out the words, is you can send out a quick little Google survey. And I do this in my pivoting class. And it says, like, what are 3 words you would use to describe me? What do you think I bring to the table? What do you think I should be doing that I don't do? How would you describe me to someone else in a job, if you were promoting me for a job? And also, maybe, what are my blind spots? If you asked 5 questions like that, imagine the kind of information you'd get. And what you would find is that you'd find so much reinforcement for the things maybe you hope and wish you're seen as, but then maybe they'll uncover some areas. Maybe you're habitually late, or you're spread too thin, or you're not as warm when we first meet you.
Yeah.
And these are things, touch points, that you can then think about, how do I want to handle that news? For example, with the icing, people always say the same thing about me. You are so calm, Allison. Like, you're just really calm. And the funny thing is, I view myself very much as a chicken without a head.
Okay. How so?
I have so much energy in my head. I have thoughts all the time. I'm always creating. I'm very high energy inside. I'm a fast talker from New York, but in the arenas where I'm teaching, I slow myself down. I pause. I use expression. Like, I am very much catering to the audience in front of me, not what feels comfortable for me. So being comfortable is maybe like Bugs Bunny, like running around like a crazy person. So, but the thing is, the more calm, the more I do the calmness, the more that's become authentic to me.
Yeah.
And my reputation. I wouldn't be able to be in the control room with Barbara Walters and all these people if I panicked.
Right.
And so by putting myself in these situations, I kind of naturally calm down.
Yeah.
And so I do believe it's authentic, even though so that's why I'm saying it's very hard to figure out your own icing sometimes. You need to ask other people. You might think you're the calmest person in the world, and people say, no, you're completely frenzied.
Right. Right. So yeah, that's the thing. It's what you think you're putting out there versus what's actually being perceived. But it sounds like in this case, the calmness is something that you deliberately tried to put out there, and successfully so, because now people are playing that back to you as one of your attributes.
Definitely. And I remember, the watershed moment when I made that decision consciously. I was maybe 22 at Good Morning America, and I was crying at work. And this older English producer named Sonia pulled me in her office, and she said, I don't ever want to see you crying at work again. And do you know why? And all I remembered is I know it was something personal and not work related. And I said, yes. And she said, it's because you're young, you're female, and you're attractive. And no one is going to trust you. And no one is going to give you any responsibility. And no one is going to think you're reliable. So if someone says, how's your day going? You say, my day is going great. And she said, if you need to cry, you come in my office and you close the door. Do you understand? And I said, yes. And then she said, now get out. And she threw me out and closed the door. And all I wanted to do was cry. But the epiphany was, I wanted to be seen as someone reliable, professional, able to do it. And so anytime I'd feel that panic or that big emotion, I would squash it, and I would go into an office and cry, or I'd take a walk, or I'd talk to a friend. And so again, practicing that every day made me naturally calmer and not likely to impulsively be emotional. Because it's really what you signal to other people that they pick up.
Well, one thing I'm taking away from that story is that, and that's a great story, by the way, is that, there are these things that are consistent across our life that are kind of our story or our narrative, things we talked about, like storytelling in your case, or Renaissance man in my case. But on top of that base, there are things we can improve upon, that we should improve upon. And authenticity isn't compromised by, becoming more polished, more calm, better communicator. These are all skills we should continue to evolve over the course of our career, while still maintaining building that DNA and that flavor that's essential to ourselves. So you can kind of do both at the same time.
Really well said. I agree with you.
And then the second takeaway I had from that story is that stories are so important. I think you mentioned in one of your classes, always have 5 stories ready to go that tie in and that demonstrate your personal brand. It's like show them, don't tell them. So that story right there was a pivotal moment in your career. I think you have 5 other, you have 5 stories that you always have ready to go. And I actually worked with a guy who was so good at this. He was a marketing guy, and he always had a story about his previous experience. He could whip it out. And it was so powerful. The CEO always listened to him because he had these concrete examples ready to go. I just think that's a very powerful skill to have, to always have a story relevant to these points that you want to make, rather than just making them in the abstract. Fill them in with a story.
Well, I think it works in any field, and thank you for saying that. But people, I'm a very, very visual person, and so I think in stories. I'm always thinking about beginning, middle, and end. And whenever I'm looking at people, I wonder what the story is behind them. I'm so interested in kind of people and personal relationships, but also the mind. We're so distracted these days by social media and by our phones that it's very hard for us to remember more than 2 or 3 facts from anything, from a lecture, from a meeting, from an interview. But a full story, anyone can remember your story from beginning to end. Maybe they'll miss a couple of the details, but they'll get the crux of it. And that's the power of the story. And look, I'm a lot older than you, so I have a lot of stories. And I probably have more than 5 in my pocket. But I know from experience when to bring something out and when it's going to be illustrative of my point.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is fantastic. And so I do want to bring us now into the home stretch here in the interest of time, kind of summarize some of the things that we've talked about. We talked about the power of storytelling. We talked about this idea of being authentic to your story, going back to childhood. What is the through line in your life, and how does it all tie together? There must be some underlying theme. We've talked about getting feedback from other people to see if how you think you're putting yourself out there is actually how you're being perceived. So many more. Any points that you would like to make that I've forgotten at the end here?
I'm serious. You are such a great communicator, and
thank you.
You are a great listener because your ability to take things in. I am so impressed.
Oh, thank you for that feedback.
I'm going to say one thing about reputation as I teach that. And I say that reputation is an echo. It precedes you into the room and it remains long after you leave. And so your echo or your reputation can actually do the work for you. So I don't know how you found me, but if you're like, someone needs to book Allison on this podcast, James, you're going to love her. Like, she really knows what she's talking about. She teaches all these courses. She's going to add a lot of value. By the time you meet me, you're more predisposed to like me and want to work with me. Then, of course, I hope the experience is what you thought or even better. And when I leave, there's the echo that's remained behind. Did Allison deliver? Did she exceed what I thought? Did she make me feel better for having been? And so the primary audience is really you and the people listening to this podcast, but then maybe people who listened will go and talk to someone else, the secondary audience, and say, you've got to listen to James' podcast. And then another audience, someone else is going to get recommended. It's the tertiary audience. So your reputation carries. And in that way, it's currency to me. What are you known for? Do you deliver it? And do you leave people feeling better for having been in your presence?
Mm-hmm. Very well said. And I'll say that you're really good at connecting. Even though we're 2,000 miles apart, you're in California, I'm in New York City. I do feel like through your stories, I've gotten to know you better as a person. And in the very short amount of time that we've been talking, I do feel like I've gotten to know you much better and connect with you. So good job on being a great connector.
Thank you.
So to wrap us up here, just on a fun note, I know you've worked now with Tyra Banks and A-Rod in your teaching career at Stanford. Any interesting stories that you can share from that experience?
Absolutely. Tyra is just a delight, and you might be very intimidated by her. She's just a very down-to-earth person. We've shopped at Target together. She is just a relaxed person. She loves being a mom. What her talent is knowing her audience and knowing what she needs to deliver to them. But she is very, very real and uncompromising in what her values are. And so she's just a delight to work with. And we laugh. And I'll tell you one funny story that in our Project U class, we talk about knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for and who you're not and what you won't stand for. And I mentioned that. So she came in at the top of the class and she had her hair in a disarray and wearing these kind of tacky clothes, a bottle of alcohol and a cigarette coming out of her mouth. And I was leading the class, we planned this, and she just comes and sits down and she's just smoking. And it was like, oh my God, who is this Tyra? And she was visually making the point, which is, this is not my brand. Mm-hmm. This is not what I stand for. And look how jarring it is if you're not consistent. Mm-hmm. So that's how Tyra thinks too. She is just brilliant in how to market herself, her image, but also showing the point that she's trying to make. So that's Tyra. Alex Rodriguez, I can't say enough great things about him. You know, he is someone who people wouldn't imagine, but he is funny. He's transparent. He's committed. He's a lifelong learner, and he's very kind. And so when we were first introduced, you know, most of us think about Alex and his steroid scandal. Mm-hmm. And so when we started in a coaching relationship, but I asked him to come into reputation management, he spent the whole class talking about his steroid scandal. And how he was at rock bottom, mm-hmm. and how he had to build the bridges and make amends, and who your real friends are, mm-hmm. and work on himself with therapy and education. Mm-hmm. And he admitted, I was a jerk before, you know, but I believe in second chances. I believe in pivoting. Mm-hmm. And this man has done everything right and has expanded his brand and his career in a way that is helpful and philanthropic and offering service. But you know, his superpower is really connecting to people. Yeah. He remembers people's names. He researches. He tells really funny stories, and he will follow through with you.
Yeah, those are great anecdotes. And you know, it's interesting in his case how he really owned that mistake and not just paid lip service and said, I apologize, like a lot of people in the public do, but he really did the work of therapy. And he said, you know what, I'm not going to be that person anymore. You know, forgive me for being that person. That's not who I am. And he really pivoted, like the name of your class with him implies.
Yeah, he just gets better and better. And I think we all get more comfortable in our skin, James. Like that's what happens when you age. You start to realize, again, what you stand for, how you want to be perceived by people. And then you show. You don't just tell. It's not enough to say, I'm going to be a better person. You have to say, I'm going to act like a better person. I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to show up that way.
Mm-hmm. And he really did a good job of that. So,
yeah.
Well, this has been so great, Allison. Thank you so much for taking the time. I feel like there's so much more we could talk about, but I will link in the show notes all the different lectures that you've filmed and some other resources for people to go and learn more. But is there any final thought or anything else that you would like to share before we wrap up?
Well, first, I want to again say how terrific you are. I've done quite a few podcasts, and I just think you are so professional and curious and insightful and a wonderful partner to do this with.
Oh, thank you so much.
I hope that everybody appreciates you because this is wonderful. Thank you for this great experience.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being so calm, by the way. I think you helped keep me calm with your calm demeanor.
That's right, because my chicken in my head is parked over there. I think my final thought, which I'd like to share, is that, you know, it's not what happens in life, it's how you choose to deal with it. And things are going to happen. There are going to be difficulties. But you can make it a moment of disaster, or you can make it a moment of triumph. And it's really up to you. Don't let other people's bad behavior or situations change how you approach the world. So show up as the best version of yourself, lead with love. And I really believe that there's karmic reciprocity in that you treat people well and they treat you back well.
What a great note to end on. So thank you so much, Allison, for being here today. I'm really excited to get this podcast out there so that everybody else can hear these great lessons that you've shared today. Really appreciate you doing this. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, James.